hardened his heart. Verse 32 of chapter 8. The fifth time Pharaoh hardened his heart. The final time in chapter 9, verse 7. The sixth time. 6 times it says, and Pharaoh hardened his heart. In chapter 9, verse 12, guess what? And God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Don't miss that. And God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Also in verse 20 and also in verse 27. 3 times God hardened Pharaoh's heart. After, and only after, he hardened his heart. How many times? 6 times. Usually when someone chooses something 3 times in one direction, the pattern is set. He gave him twice as long. So did God raise up Pharaoh for the specific purpose of hardening his heart? No. Pharaoh hardened his heart. He had a choice. He chose to reject the revelation, not 1, 2, 3, 6 times. 6 times. Now watch this. Here's the argument. Okay. Well, if God hasn't predestined me, and I'm not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, how can he blame me? It's his fault I'm not saved. If God has to open my heart to be saved, he didn't open my heart, it's his fault. Now watch, here's the argument. One of you will say to me, verse 19, then why does God still blame us? For who resists his will? God can't hold me accountable. If he has to open my heart for me to respond, and he hasn't opened my heart, I can't respond, i.e. it's his fault I'm not saved. That's a wrong conclusion from a right premise. The right premise is God has to open your heart. The wrong conclusion is it's his fault if you don't choose it. Did you catch that? Look at what Paul says. But who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to him who formed it? Why did you make me like this? You know what Paul's saying? Take your position as clay. You're clay. You don't get to dictate to God. Just because you can't understand something doesn't mean God is wrong. John Calvin said this, there's a madness in the mind of a man in which he is so ready to accuse God of an unright rather than to look within to his own inability to understand the mind of an infinite God. What a great statement. We are so ready to shake our fist at God and say, this ain't right. This isn't fair. And Paul says, listen.
Well, that's us trying to be God.
That's us trying to be God.
Right.
Does not, now look what he says, does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? What's the question? What's the answer? It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
Of course he does. Who are we? Let me comfort your heart, okay? Because we're going to go through these 7 reasons. Of course, we're running out of time. Paul says you take your place as clay. God is sovereign. God is supreme. Let me ask you a question. Is God's ways perfect? Is he merciful? Is he kind? Yes. When it comes to the doctrine of predestination versus free will, I have to rest in the fact that God is perfect. His ways are perfect. Whoever is in heaven is supposed to be in heaven, and whoever is not supposed to be there. His ways are perfect. Yet he is merciful, and he is kind, and he is loving, and I believe he has given every man a choice and a chance to believe. It's that simple. John MacArthur said it best. He said, look, when I'm preaching through the Bible and the doctrine of predestination comes up, I preach it with all the fervor and all the passion I can possibly muster. And then when I come to the point where it says, whosoever believes, and man has a choice, he says, I preach it with the same fervor and the